an end to the violence and for the safe return of their loved ones. In this past year, it has been hard to find any bright spots at all, but they are mine. During the past year, Emily Damari, Oded Lifshitz, Yocheved and Oded Lifshitz, Nadav Popplewell, Ada Sagai, Eli Sharabi and Yossi Sharabi have never been far from our thoughts. Nadav and Yossi were murdered in captivity. Ada and Yocheved were released. Eli, Emily and Oded remain in Gaza in inhuman conditions. Today we've invited you to hear from 4 of the family members about their delegation to London to mark the anniversary of the 7th of October attacks. Ahead of the delegation, the families received a personal message from King Charles and Queen Camilla. Their Majesties said that they continue to keep them and all hostage families in their special thoughts and offer their prayers for the strength and endurance during such a dreadfully difficult and agonizing time. And we thank the King and Queen for that message. The families have today had private meetings with the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, and the Qatari Ambassador to the UK, as well as Foreign Office officials, including His Excellency Charles Hay, the Director of the Gaza Hostages Team at the Foreign Office. They have attended a memorial event at Downing Street, hosted by the Prime Minister and attended by the Deputy Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary and Attorney General, as well as dignitaries. You will hear from 4 people today. Stephen Brisley, brother of Lianne Sharabi, uncle of Noiya and Yahel Sharabi, all British citizens who were murdered on the 7th of October. Steve is the brother-in-law of Eli Sharabi, who is a hostage, and Eli's brother, Yossi Sharabi, was killed as a hostage in January. We'll hear from Ayelet Svatitzky, daughter of Hannah Perry, a hostage who was released, and sister of Nadav Popplewell, a British citizen who was murdered whilst in captivity, and Roy Popplewell, a British citizen murdered in his home on the 7th of October. You'll hear from Sharone Lifschitz, a British citizen and daughter of Oded and Yocheved Lifshitz. Yocheved was a hostage who was released by Hamas. Oded, age 84, remains a hostage. And Sharon Sharabi, brother of Yossi Sharabi, who was murdered in captivity, and Eli Sharabi, who is a hostage. I will now hand over to the families, who will speak for a few minutes each and then open up to questions. Please remember that family members are not political commentators and are not here to speak about the political situation in the Middle East. And also please remember that English is not everybody's first language, so I would appreciate if you could consider your question in that light. And one final bit of housekeeping is that photographs will be available from number 10, we understand, of the morning's events after this. So I'll hand over now to Steve Brisley.
I'm Steve. My sister Lianne and my 2 nieces, 16-year-old Noiya and 13-year-old Yahel, were murdered by Hamas terrorists in their home on Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. Lianne's husband, Eli Sharabi, and his brother Yossi were taken hostage to Gaza. Both remain in captivity today. Yossi was murdered in captivity in January, but his body remains in Gaza. Eli is, as far as we know, alive in captivity. People ask me how I am, how I'm bearing up. Honestly, I'm tired. So tired. Every day without Eli home safe is like an added weight to my shoulders. Every day that passes feels like the horrors to which Lianne, Noiya and Yahel were subjected to has been forgotten by the public. That their innocence has been forgotten. That they have been forgotten. People often say to me that they can't imagine what I'm going through. And no, they can't. But they can try. But I wonder if people do try, because the news cycle moves on and public shock dissipates. It seems impossible to me that they have forgotten the cold-blooded, brutal murders of a dental nurse and her 2 teenage daughters, all 3 of whom were British citizens. Let me say that again. All 3 of whom were British citizens. I sometimes wonder if it would resonate with the public more if I were to highlight the fact that the family dog Mocha was also shot and bled out under the dining table, where bloodstains show she had dragged herself to die. Would that resonate more deeply than 3 British citizens being shot dead in the hallway outside their bedrooms, being found days later, still slumped where their lifeless bodies dropped to the floor? Would that resonate more deeply than my brother-in-law being dragged from his home, barefoot and in his pyjamas, perhaps not knowing whether his family was alive or dead? 51 weeks have passed since the attack. 51 weeks since my family was torn apart. 51 weeks since Eli was taken. That's more than a football season, more than an academic year. We've cycled through all 4 seasons. We've changed governments. All of these things while Eli and the other hostages have been held underground in tunnels, tied up, in cells, in cages, in filth, malnourished, injured, sick, and some tortured, and some murdered. People forget that October 7th was not an act of war. It was an act of terrorism. The indiscriminate killing and kidnapping of civilians. 39 different nationalities. Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus and Buddhists. So please don't tell me that this was about politics or religion or nations. This was about savagery and evil. And the hostages are innocents. So I call upon all governments, upon my government, to do better, to do more, to bring them home.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayelet Svatitzky. I'm the sister of Roy Popowell, a British citizen who was murdered just outside his house on October 7. My mom, Hannah Perry, was 79 at the time, and my brother, Nadav Popowell, who was 51, were taken hostage and held in the tunnels together for 49 days until my mom was released on November 24th. When she was released, she could tell us of how Nadav was doing. She described how little food she was they were given, and the conditions where they were being held at. We kept praying and fighting for the release of Nadav and all the hostages. In May, Hamas released a video, I'm sure many of you saw it, with my brother saying who he was, with a big black eye. Hamas then claimed my brother was no longer alive, and on the 3rd of June, it has been confirmed by Israel that Nadav had died several months earlier. He survived 5 months in the tunnels before he was murdered with 5 other hostages, and their bodies were found in August, and we were able to bring him home and bury him and Roy together on Kibbutz Nir Oz, where they both lived. So a month ago, I stood in front of my brother's graves, one next to the other, and I said my final goodbye. My mom, who just turned 80, lost both her sons, and she is now dealing not only with the loss, but also with the trauma of being held captive, being kidnapped from her home on a quiet Shabbat morning. She was dragged outside to the living room in her nightwear. Hamas sent me 2 pictures from her WhatsApp to mine, showing my mom in her nightwear sitting in the living room next to my brother. And then they were taken, and the 3rd picture was published to my mom's Facebook story by Hamas so that the world could see what was happening to them. And Ever since we've buried Nadav, I made the choice to keep fighting for the release of all the hostages, because I feel that that is what my brother would want me to do, and I'm doing this on behalf of him and on behalf of my 80-year-old mom, who can't, because she's going through a rehabilitation process at the moment and dealing with everything. So I'm here pleading for everyone not to forget what had happened to us on October 7th, not to forget 101 hostages still in Gaza, not to forget the horrors and the torture that they are going through and the conditions that they are being held at. And I'm here to call for the release of all the hostages and to bring them home now.
My name is Sharone Lifschitz. I'm a British citizen. I live in the UK for most of my life. I am the daughter of Oded and Yocheved Lifshitz. Both of them were taken hostage from Kibbutz Nir Oz on the 7th of October. I was a classmate of Ayelet's brother. My mom was in Gaza, 40 meters underground, with Ayelet's mother and her brother. When she came back, she called Ayelet to tell her that she saw them. We are very interconnected, and we share this pain, this enormous pain. It's been a year. Today we had a very truthful meeting with the Prime Minister. We feel encouraged by the fact that he listened carefully to what we said. I think the British government can and should do more. I think that once they are back, once there is a ceasefire, we can portion the blame for the 7th of October and portion the blame for what has happened since. But for us, we are still in the 7th of October. We are fighting for the life of our loved ones that are there. I do not know if my father is dead or alive, but we fight together, and I want to see those who can come back, come back. We are told by many that nothing much is going to happen until the election in the US. For us, this is a huge blow. We have waited a year. We know that Eden Yerushalmi came back weighing 70 pounds or so. We know that they don't have time. We fear for their life. We fear for what happened when Hamas doesn't think they are their diamonds, but think that they might be a liability. We want guaranteed by the British government that they are indeed seeing the hostages with close British link and those with British citizenship as their problem. They are not just encouraging the government of Israel to do the right thing. They must treat them as if they are their own and find any way possible to exert any pressure possible on all parties to secure their well-being at this point as much as possible and bring them back home as quick as possible. My mom returned to us after 17 days. She is waiting for my dad. She turned 86. My father is 84. We have heard nothing of him since the hostages came back and told us that he survived the day. He was shot and he was 84 and not in great health, and he survived. They are trying to survive there. They are really doing their best. People keep telling us we are doing our best. Believe me, we don't. We haven't managed to impress on whoever it is that their life are worth saving, that their life is not part of the problem. It's just their life. My mom did not wake up on the 7th of October wanting to be a world superstar. She woke up and thought whether she wants milk in her coffee or not. And everything that proceeds is because of a huge series of failures. But this is not a done deal. There are people alive in Gaza now that have survived for almost 12 months. And anybody who is decent must wish for their return, must do all it takes to bring them back home to us.
My name is Sharone Sharabi, the brother of Eli and Yossi Sharabi, that still hostages in Gaza, the brother-in-law Lianne, and the uncle of Noiya and Yahel, that were murdered on October 7 in Kibbutz Be'eri. And Yossi lost his life after 100 days in captivity. He was murdered by Hamas. Sharabi's family lost 4 people, and we are not intending to receive the 5th coffin. Very soon, we're supposed to celebrate Israeli holiday, Rosh Hashanah. Around the table, we have 5 empty chairs. 4 of them never be fully again. I asked from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and from the Foreign Minister, David Lammy, to put on the table British offer. 1 year the hostages, waiting for them, waiting for from the UK government to do all to save them. Stop the war, stop the torture, and bring them home. This is the time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to open up to questions now. And just while people are raising their hands, I wanted to share that the 2 things the Prime Minister said today. He said, first and foremost, the hostages must be freed. And he also said, we need the hostages returned immediately and unconditionally. Now, who would like to ask a question? Lucy. Lucy Manning. Just I'll repeat it if you want to ask.
Thank you. Lucy Manning, BBC News. It's now nearly a year since October 7th. Do you feel let down by those in power that some of your loved ones have returned home in coffins and some of your loved ones have returned home at all?
I think for me, it's difficult to feel anything other than let down. The facts speak for themselves. The price of failure was writ large in Yossi's murder in captivity. As time goes by, more hostages die. We've had 6 murdered recently. I think my concern is it's the sunk cost fallacy of doing the same thing over and over again that we've been doing for the past 51 weeks. We receive assurances from the previous administration and the current administration that they're doing all that they can. As ever, we've just got to have faith that they are doing everything they can, but it surely is time for something new and innovative, because all that they've been doing for the last 51 weeks has not worked. The hostages are still there. The war carries on. A deal to release the hostages has not been secured. So it's difficult to reach any conclusion other than the fact there has been an abject failure of international diplomacy. So yes, I do feel let down, much as I'm grateful to the previous administration and the current government for the support they're giving us. I do have to say that it's clear that more must be done, because this situation cannot continue like this, because we have seen what the price of failure is.
Does anyone else want to speak to that?
I'll just say, first of all, I feel like I've failed my brother, which is quite a horrible feeling to live with. But I feel like I've failed him, and people say, you've done all you can. Well, it wasn't enough, because he died. I feel like we all failed them because they were innocent civilians kidnapped from their homes, didn't do anything bad to anyone in their lives. My brother didn't have one bad bone in his body. So I feel like I failed them. And I feel like everyone failed him, because at the end of the day, he didn't make it, and we got back a coffin to bury. And what scares me the most is, at least I got an answer. I got to know what happened to him, and I got him back. What scared me the most throughout the time is, what if we'll never know? That was my biggest fear, never knowing what happened to him. What if a deal comes through and the hostages are released and all of a sudden he's not there? He's gone. And that's what scares me. And every day that goes by, we are at the risk of families not having an answer at the end of this. And every day that goes by, we are at the risk of more hostages dying. So I think that everyone should do more. Definitely, I agree with Sharon. The UK should put a deal on the table. More ideas should come to the table, and we need to find a solution for this. We must. So no other families get back a coffin and not their loved ones alive.
And I'm going to open up for questions again. I think Molly from Sky. I'm not sure where. Yes, sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking to us today. Innocent civilians, you say, were kidnapped, but I wanted to ask you, a month ago today, Prime Minister Netanyahu asked Israelis for forgiveness after he was unable to bring 6 hostages back alive. What is your message to him and his government today, and how concerned are you that events in Lebanon might delay efforts to bring home your loved ones?
I think that every poll I've seen so far shows that the solid majority of Israelis and the solid majority of Jewish Israelis, because we must remember 20% of the population in Israel are Palestinian with Israeli passport. But even of the Jewish Israelis, there's a solid majority of people that believe that the hostages will only come back in a deal, and wish for that deal and ask for the Prime Minister to do it. My message to him is to listen to the people of Israel and get that deal. I don't think that he should wait until after the election to reach a deal. There is the possibility of a deal now, and what is missing is the will of both sides.
I think as far as a message for Netanyahu is concerned, it's time to become statesmanlike and do the right thing and secure a deal. Too long has passed with the deal in various iterations over the last 6 or 8 months. It's unfathomable to me that it's been impossible to get one of those deals over the line. Now, there's, I'm sure, been lots of finger-pointing behind closed doors. I'm not really particularly bothered about apportioning blame, whether to Netanyahu, to Hamas, or to anyone else. But it's clear that the only way the hostages are going to get out alive is through a deal. It's the only way a mass release of hostages will happen, because very few of them are ever going to be rescued in the way we've seen a handful. As far as the wider political situation in the Middle East is concerned, I couldn't speak particularly intelligently on that. My late sister certainly could. My only concern is that it takes focus away from what is the most important thing, which is the release of the hostages. The Israeli government has consistently said from the 8th of October onwards that the hostages are the #1 priority. That's not the impression I get at the moment, nor over the past 3, 4, 5, 6 months, because if the hostages were the first priority, then a deal would have been done by now.
I was with Netanyahu 3 days ago in UN, New York. On Israel have many traits in the north, in the south, and we heard about the activities of the IDF in the north, and the elimination of Nasrallah. On the one hand, we have a risk for the hostages because the war continues. But the other hand, we have opportunity to make a deal, to make one agreement that integrate the situation, the north and the south, to bring the hostages home and stop the war with Lebanon and with Hamas. We have to do the right decision. And this is the opportunity of Netanyahu to take the right decision.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your meeting today and what the Prime Minister said to you and David Landon, because Sharon said it was quite positive. So could you explain in what way?
Ayelet, do you want to start?
Me?
Yes.
So we've, families of the hostages have met with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, this morning. Personally, I found it to be a good meeting. We've all had a chance to share with him our feelings and our concerns, and also ask for the government to do more, to do as much as they can to help resolve this situation. Of course, we've shared with him our worries and our concerns. What I heard was the government was very committed to this situation and to finding a resolution. We are talking of a very complex situation. Obviously, both the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister shared with us of what they've recently done, or at least some of the conversations that they've had. But what I took from that meeting was mainly our request for more engagement from the government in the negotiations and in breaking a deal. And I hope we're going to see more action on their part.
I have faith in the British government, but I think this was a very important meeting because it's a new government. They haven't been in power for a long time. And in this situation, it's not enough not to make mistakes. You have to take decisive action. To my mind, that include really recognizing that you have here British citizens. So the responsibility is very directly with the government. I hold the Prime Minister responsible for the life of these hostages. I know that it's complex, I know that it is, but I want different thinking, and thinking that really acknowledges that the United Kingdom has hostages. My son has a grandfather, he lives in London, and he has a grandfather held somewhere in Khan Yunis. What is my government doing to bring him home? And it's not enough to press like this and press like that on the Prime Minister of Israel, on Qatar, etc., etc. This is a responsibility and a problem directly of the British government. And I think that a lot of the meeting was about expressing that.
Anyone else wants to speak to that?
I was just going to say that I mean, the Prime Minister, as you heard earlier, said that first and foremost the hostages, those that's a commitment that we will hold him to, because I think up until this point we've been concerned that when the situation in Israel is being spoken about by the British government, that the British citizens that are being held there, the British families of hostages, are not at the forefront of that. We accept that the wider political situation is important. We accept that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is important. But the number one priority is to protect the lives and interests of British people. That is the job of the British government. And so with British hostages and British families with relatives as hostages, that's what we expect of our government, and that's the point we made to the Prime Minister. I think he heard us, and he understood that, and committed to redouble the government's efforts to make a difference. But I think I go back to saying the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's why we need something new, we need something innovative, we need something fresh, and that's a hope that we have for this government, that they can find something that has not been found in the previous 51 weeks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Carl Dinnan from ITV News. You talk about the British government doing more. Are you suggesting that the British government should become directly involved in negotiations, perhaps cutting off the Israeli government and going directly to the Yocheved? And is that something that you've raised with the Prime Minister? What was his reaction to that?
I mean, we're not politicians and diplomats, so it's difficult for us to say what a government can realistically do. The UK has never been in the room as far as negotiations are concerned. It's something we've discussed with the previous administration and the current administration, that is that something that the UK can do or should do. The message we've fairly consistently had back is that the belief is that additional bodies in the room will not be useful. I can't speak to whether that's true or not, but I go back to what I've said before, that something needs to change, where it's been Hamas, Israel, Egypt and Qatar in the room, and perhaps with the Americans as well. We're 51 weeks on, and it's not borne fruit. So perhaps it is time for the British government to exercise its influence in a more hands-on manner. Whether or not that's a utopian thought on my point, I'm not sure.
Another question?
Linda Controller from National Security News. When they talk about elections, they say there's an election in the US, that's today, and you talked about election as well. So what message do you have for the government, not only the UK government, but also the US government? They're talking about delays. Are you patient about that? Or do you want to tell them, just get on with it, whatever these geopolitical issues, whether it's the EU, the US, or the UK, are?
I think that we have the problem that there is several timelines. There's timeline of solutions to the Middle East, and it's been going on for 4,000 years. It's probably going to go on to another 4,000 years. And there's the timeline of the hostages. And there's hostages' families, time and time again. We look at everything from that point of view. I look at everything that happened, and I think, how does a Hamas guard, breaking the news to a hostage, somebody I know, someone else know, and what do they feel? They have been trying against all odds to survive in the most horrendous ways, without the love of their families, for 12 months. Can they wait? Can they kind of think, yeah, it makes sense, I'll just sit back and relax, waiting for the election and then waiting for this to take power? We have two timelines, and the timeline of the hostages You know, I keep saying to people that as hostage families, we have 20% of the energy, and we are running at 200 miles an hour, and we've been running for 12 months almost. But we're still, you know, surrounded by our loved ones and by comfort, and our hostages are there. The conditions there have deteriorated constantly. We know from the people that came back after 50 days and those that were taken out by Israel. They don't have time. We don't know when is the cutting off time for their lives, and we are trying to scream the urgency of the situation. There's no time. We don't know how many more will die until the 5th of November. We cannot personally, as hostage families, sit back and understand everything. We just want to scream back at the world and say, it cannot be.
Thank you. Just behind you.
And Sharone Lifschitz from LBC, you described just there how you want to scream at the world what you and your families are currently going through. And we're of course hearing that Israel are potentially going to launch a ground incursion in Lebanon today. Do you fear that that focus there, that focus north of the border, around the world and with political leaders is taking away the focus from the hostages and the families?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that, again, Hamas have been made strong over many years by several parties. I think Hezbollah has grown strong over several years. That's another timeline. But it takes away from the hostages. They're there, and if there's a ground incursion, they've been telling us that nothing will happen for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 5 weeks. So we are in a losing battle. We have been on this mudslide for a year, and it's getting worse and worse. And anything that take away the possibility of all the parties sitting together and reaching a deal does not help the hostages.
Well, I spoke at a parliamentary event in January to mark the 100 days, and in response to a question from one of the MPs there, I said I don't want to be back here talking about 150 days or 200 days. And here we are at 350 days. There's been a delay at every stage. There's a deal, there's a new deal, it's an amended deal, there's communication problems, there's a UK election, there's a US election, there's war in the north. It's an ever-moving deadline. For the hostages, the word dead in deadline is a very, very real possibility. And so we talk about kicking the can down the road here, and will things change because of the American election? Can we wait for the American election? No, we cannot wait for the American election and the outcome of that, because we've seen with the murders of the 6 hostages, which, as we understand it, were by a Hamas terrorists who got spooked by the IDF being nearby. That's the sort of thing that's going to happen increasingly. So the prospect of waiting for another 5 weeks for an outcome and another 8, 9, 10 weeks for a new president to take office is simply not one that we can countenance.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Man at the back.
Hello, Adam Chapman, GB News. Firstly, at a time when Western support for the cause is so important, what message would you like to say to the West, especially when we see such deep divided divisions on the streets? What would you like to communicate to the West? And a related question to that is, what should the West kind of understand about Hamas that perhaps is not cutting through at the moment?
I think it's a case of reiterating to people that Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and I think some people are forgetting that this is being treated as though the taking of civilian hostages was an act of war and taking of prisoners of war. It was an act of terrorism. They're taken as hostages. It's against all international humanitarian law. I think that's the most important message to get out there on this, and to not take such a binary approach to everything. You don't have to choose one set of innocence over another set of innocence. It's always been my position that I have the greatest of sympathy for the innocent people in Gaza who do not support Hamas and who are suffering a humanitarian crisis. But as I've also repeatedly said, there's a humanitarian crisis in terms of the hostages. They are starving, they are kept underground, they are injured, they're sick, they're being tortured, and they're being murdered. So I think we need to get away from thinking about this as being an Israel-Hamas war. This is about Israel responding to a terrorist attack and the West responding to a terrorist attack, and let's not forget that.
Can I answer that question as well? My mom just turned 80. Sharon's parents are over 80. They were held in the tunnels. My brother, they released a video of him with a black eye, claiming that he was dead. They have done everything in their power to torment us, even after my brother's been pronounced dead, even after we've buried him. They continue to release videos, including my brother's picture in them. So if anyone thinks that the personal torture that I'm going through has ended when my brother was brought to burial, then no, they keep torturing us to this day. They've tortured my mom emotionally. Physically, they just held her in the tunnels with very little food, no hygiene, water in brown water in cans. So I don't need to call them any names, or I don't need to label them. I think every human should hear those stories and decide for himself what kind of I can't even, I'm sorry, I find it difficult to call them people, okay? Because what they did to my family and what they did to all of our families is monstrous. But I think it's up to every person to listen to the stories that, by the way, they do not deny. They took GoPro cameras to screen to the world what they've been doing to us that day. And that now it's up to each and every person to look at those pictures and define it for themselves.
I think that sometimes in the West people forget that Hamas is a terrorist totalitarian organization, and that over the course of time when Hamas has been in power, the population more or less doubled. That means that half the population of Gaza now doesn't know any alternative to a totalitarian terrorist organization running the show. The reason you don't hear a lot of dissent from Gaza is the same that you wouldn't hear a lot coming out of Afghanistan or out of Iraq under, what's his name? Saddam Hussein. You know, they don't know almost an alternative to a totalitarian regime. The second thing is that I think if you would now do a survey in the UK asking people why is Hamas not being taken to court, people will not know to tell you to international court that they are not being taken because they are a terrorist organization. And so there's a kind of, often in the media it feels as if there is IDF fighting with Gazan children, and that is the war. And yet I know from hostages that came back that our hostages were kept in their homes of UNRWA employees, our hostages were kept in hospitals, our hostages were kept under school. Our hostages were taken as part of the infrastructure of Hamas. Hamas has created an infrastructure that is under every civilian organization there. And I think I think people don't get it here, that there is a real fight going on. And the fight is, I am totally not with the Israeli government. I'm a civilian whose family was shattered on the 7th of October. But without us understanding that there is a totalitarian regime holding hostage also their own people and treating them in the most as what? As you know, as targets. They've been shooting into my community for 20 years. Bang on us. The reason we are not all dead is that the government has built safe rooms for us. The government in Gaza did not build safe rooms because they built infrastructure for terror. There's a huge difference. We can like or dislike Israel. I don't mind, but we have to understand that these are not people that are sharing our values of democracy.
Sharon, did you want to say anything? No. We're going to stop now, and I want to first of all say thank you to Stephen, to Ayelet, to Sharon and Sharon for sharing their testimony today. I want to also say that there will be opportunities for interviews, for personal interviews after this. Just come up to either us or to David Quickler, who can help with that. Also in the room is Moshe Or, whose brother is being held hostage, who sat there.
So British-Israeli hostage families holding a news conference there. They met with Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer earlier, and we heard some harrowing and distressing descriptions of what happened to their loved ones. Stephen Brisley saying, "I call upon all governments